The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a peaceful forest just outside the city. A sleek car rolls up, and out steps a man with a leather suitcase and a revolver. He pops the case open on the hood, and there it is. $10 million in crisp bills, stacked like a dream come true. He looks you dead in the eye and says, "Want to play Russian roulette? One pull of the trigger, and all this cash is yours." He flips open the cylinder. 6 chambers, 5 empty, 1 loaded bullet. So, what do? $10 million. That's enough money to walk away from your job, buy that dream house, set your family up for life. Every worry you've ever had about money, gone. You take the gun. Cold steel against your temple, eyes closed. You squeeze the trigger. Click. Nothing. The chamber was empty. Your heart is hammering, adrenaline screaming through your veins, but you're alive. And you're now a multimillionaire. You grab the money and start building the life you've always wanted. Fast forward a few years. A journalist writes a glowing feature about your incredible mansion. They marvel at your success, your courage, your brilliance. They see the outcome, the cars, the lifestyle, the winner's glow, and they write about a genius who made it big. But here's what they missed. They saw the one timeline where you won. They never saw the 5 other timelines where your story ended in tragedy. They focused on the result and completely ignored the insane risk you took. And that's exactly the world we're living in. We worship success stories without understanding the hidden forces and sheer luck behind them. We make decisions every single day based on a mental map riddled with blind spots, illusions, and booby traps. That's where The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli comes in. This isn't just another dry psychology book. Think of it as a survival guide for your brain, a catalog of the 99 most common thinking errors that trip us up in our careers, finances, and relationships. Rolf Dobelli wasn't even a psychologist. He was a novelist and entrepreneur who noticed something strange. Even incredibly smart people, himself included, kept making irrational decisions. So he started compiling a personal list of these mental glitches, these bugs, in our cognitive software. That private list turned into newspaper columns, which eventually became an international bestseller that sold millions of copies. What you're about to learn isn't a set of rules for perfect thinking. It's a toolkit for recognizing the ways you're sabotaging yourself. By the end of this journey, you'll have a new set of lenses. You'll understand why you overestimate what you know, why you cling to bad ideas way too long, and why you're a total sucker for a good story, even when the facts scream otherwise. This isn't about turning into an emotionless robot. It's about becoming wiser. It's about learning to spot the invisible tripwires in your own mind so you can step right over them and start making smarter choices. So let's dive in to the art of thinking clearly. To really understand what Rolf Dobelli is teaching us, we first need to accept a kind of uncomfortable truth. Our brains weren't designed for perfect, logical thinking. They're survival machines, fine-tuned over hundreds of thousands of years to make fast, good-enough decisions in a world that doesn't exist anymore. As Dobelli puts it, we're basically hunter-gatherers in business suits, trying to navigate the complexities of modern life with ancient hardware. And that mismatch? That's where almost all our thinking errors come from. Let's start with one of the biggest illusions we face every day, the illusion of success. We're constantly bombarded with success stories. Rock stars on stage, billionaires on magazine covers, star athletes all over social media. Their success looks so real, so achievable. So, like a young musician named Rick in the book, we pick up a guitar, start a band, and dream of making it big. But here's what we never see, what Dobelli calls the graveyard of failed musicians. For every rock star you see performing, there are 10,000 others who never made it. Their stories are invisible. Their failures are silent. This is survivorship bias. We dramatically overestimate our chances of success because we only see the survivors, never the casualties. Think about it. Behind every best-selling author are 100 writers whose books flopped. Behind them are another 100 who never found a publisher. Behind them are thousands more who dream of writing a book someday. But you only hear about the Stephen Kings of the world. This isn't just about creative fields. It's true for entrepreneurs, investors, anyone chasing a big dream. The media has zero interest in covering failure. So if you want the real picture, you have to dig for it yourself. You need to visit those graveyards. Remind yourself that for every triumph, there are countless silent disasters. Success is way less likely than it appears. This leads us right into another related trap, what Nassim Taleb calls the swimmer's body illusion. Taleb, who's friends with Dobelli, tells this story about wanting to get in shape. He noticed that professional swimmers all had these incredible, streamlined physiques, so he started training hard at his local pool twice a week. But pretty quickly, he realized his mistake. Professional swimmers don't get those perfect bodies because they swim. It's the reverse. They became successful swimmers because they were born with those bodies. Their physique was the selection factor, not the result. We fall for this everywhere. We see gorgeous models in cosmetics ads and think the products will make us beautiful. But the models were already beautiful. That's why they got the gig. We see Harvard graduates crushing it in their careers and assume Harvard must be an amazing school. But is it? Or does Harvard simply cherry-pick the brightest students in the world, who probably would have succeeded anywhere? We constantly confuse selection factors with results, and we do this to ourselves too. When happy people share their secret, they might say, "You just have to see the glass as half full." What they don't realize is that many of them were born with a sunny disposition. They're naturally wired to see the positive. Some scientists have put it bluntly. Trying to be happier is as futile as trying to be taller. So before you chase the swimmer's body or the Harvard degree or the secret to happiness, take an honest look in the mirror. Are you confusing the result with the prerequisite? Understanding this distinction is the first step toward setting goals that actually make sense. But our minds don't just misinterpret the world. They actively invent patterns where none exist. This is the clustering illusion. Ever seen a face in the clouds? Or an animal shape in a rock formation? Of course you have. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, and if they can't find a pattern, they'll just make one up. Back in 1994, a woman in Florida bit into a piece of toast and saw the face of the Virgin Mary. She kept the toast in a plastic container and eventually sold it on eBay for $28,000. Years earlier, a NASA spacecraft photographed a rock formation on Mars that looked eerily like a human face. It made headlines worldwide. But when a later probe took a clearer picture, the face turned out to be just a pile of boring rocks. Seems harmless, right? But in the financial markets, this illusion can destroy you. Dobelli had a friend who was convinced he'd discovered a pattern. If you multiply the percentage change of the Dow Jones by the percentage change in oil prices, you get the movement of gold prices 2 days later. His theory worked for a few weeks. He started betting bigger and bigger amounts, until eventually he lost everything. He'd seen a pattern where there was nothing but random noise. The world is drenched in randomness, but our brains absolutely hate randomness. They crave order, meaning, stories. Which brings us to one of the most powerful and dangerous biases of all, the story bias. Life is just a chaotic jumble of details. Drank coffee with 2 sugars. Stepped on a thumbtack. Dreamed I kissed the neighbor. But we don't experience our lives as a random list of events. We weave them into a neat, coherent narrative. We want our lives to have meaning, purpose, a storyline. We do the same thing with history. We look back and understand why the Treaty of Versailles led to World War II or why the fall of the Berlin Wall was inevitable. But these events aren't truly understandable in that tidy way. We're just building meaning into them after the fact. Stories simplify reality. They distort it. They filter out everything that doesn't fit the narrative. But we can't seem to live without them. The media knows this intimately. When a car drives off a bridge, the news doesn't focus on the structural engineering of the bridge or the metal fatigue. No, they tell you the story of the unlucky driver, where he was from, where he was going, what his dreams were. We're magnetically drawn to stories and repelled by abstract data. E.M. Forster gave the perfect example. Which sentence is more memorable? A. The king died and the queen died. B. The king died and the queen died of grief. Almost everyone remembers the second one better. Sentence A is just facts. Sentence B has emotional meaning. It connects the events. Our brains aren't built for raw information. They're built for stories. And that's where the danger creeps in. Stories give us a false sense of understanding. They make the world seem simpler, more predictable, more just than it actually is. They can lead us to take bigger risks because we think we understand things that are fundamentally random. So whenever you hear a story, ask yourself, who's telling it? What do they want? And most importantly, what are they leaving out? Pick it apart. The missing facts are often way more important than the ones you're hearing. This tendency to look back and create tidy narratives leads directly to hindsight bias, or the I told you so phenomenon. In retrospect, everything seems obvious and inevitable. Back in 2007, economic experts were painting rosy pictures of the future. Just 12 months later, global financial markets imploded. When asked about the crisis, those same experts perfectly explained its causes: loose monetary policy, corrupt rating agencies, low capital requirements. In hindsight, it all seemed painfully obvious. But if it was so obvious, why didn't anyone see it coming? Hindsight bias is dangerous because it makes us think we're better at predicting the future than we actually are. It inflates our confidence and leads us to take excessive risks. You see this in your own life, too. Of course, Sylvia and Chris broke up. They were always too different, or too similar. Whatever happened, you can always build a story that makes it seem inevitable. So how do you fight this? Dobelli offers a brilliant suggestion. Keep a journal. Write down your predictions about your career, the stock market, politics, whatever. Then, every so often, go back and compare what you predicted with what actually happened. You'll be shocked at how terrible your forecasting is. It's humbling, but it's one of the best ways to get a realistic sense of just how unpredictable the world really is. Our misunderstanding of the past and present is matched only by our overestimation of our own abilities. This is the overconfidence effect. We systematically overestimate our knowledge and our predictive powers, and we do it on a massive scale. It's not about whether a single estimate is right, but about the gap between what we think we know and what we actually know. And here's the kicker. Experts suffer from this even more than regular people. An economics professor asked to forecast oil prices in 5 years will be just as wrong as a zookeeper. But the professor will deliver his forecast with absolute certainty. This isn't limited to predictions. 84% of French men believe they're above-average lovers. 93% of U.S. students think they're above-average drivers. Statistically, of course, only 50% can be above average. This bias is actually what fuels entrepreneurship. Every restaurant owner dreams of creating the next Michelin-starred sensation, even though statistics show most restaurants close within 3 years. Without overconfidence, far fewer people would take the leap into starting a business. So be aware that you naturally overestimate what you know. Be skeptical of predictions, especially from so-called experts. And when making plans, favor the pessimistic scenario. That way, you've got a shot at judging things somewhat realistically. This brings us to what Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, calls chauffeur knowledge. Munger tells a story about physicist Max Planck, who won the Nobel Prize and toured Germany giving the same lecture on quantum mechanics over and over. His chauffeur heard it so many times, he eventually knew it by heart. One day, the chauffeur joked, "Professor Planck, you must be bored giving the same speech every time. How about I deliver it in Munich, while you sit in the front row wearing my chauffeur's cap?" Planck agreed. That evening, the chauffeur delivered a flawless lecture on quantum mechanics, but at the end, A physics professor stood up and asked a highly technical question. Without missing a beat, the chauffeur replied, "I never would have thought someone from such an advanced city as Munich would ask such a simple question. My chauffeur will answer it." Munger says there are two types of knowledge. Real knowledge comes from people who've put in the hard work to truly understand a topic. Chauffeur knowledge comes from people who've learned to put on a good show, great hair, confident voice, eloquent words, but the knowledge isn't really theirs. News anchors are the perfect example. They're actors reading from a teleprompter, but we give them respect and authority they haven't earned. Same goes for many journalists, consultants, and even some chief executives who have more star quality than substance. So how do you tell the difference? True experts recognize the limits of what they know. If they find themselves outside their circle of competence, as Warren Buffett calls it, they're not afraid to say, "I don't know." They might even say it with pride. From a chauffeur, you'll hear every line except that one. Now let's shift from the illusions in our own minds to the powerful, often invisible influence other people have on us. You're walking to a concert. At an intersection, you see a group of people staring up at the sky. Without thinking, you look up too. Why? In the middle of the concert, someone starts clapping and suddenly the whole room joins in. You do too. Why? The answer is social proof, sometimes called herd instinct. We feel like we're doing the right thing when we're doing the same thing as everyone else. The more people who follow an idea, the truer we think that idea is. Which is, of course, ridiculous. If 50 million people believe something foolish, it's still foolish. Social proof is the dark force behind stock market bubbles and crashes. It shows up in fashion trends, management fads, diets. Why do we act this way? In our evolutionary past, it was a solid survival strategy. Imagine you're on the African savanna 50,000 years ago with your hunter-gatherer crew, and suddenly, everyone starts running. What would you do? You wouldn't stand there analyzing whether that's really a lion or just something that looks like one. You'd run. The people who didn't copy others' behavior? They're not our ancestors. This pattern is so deeply wired into us that we still use it today, even when it offers zero survival advantage. Comedy shows use canned laughter to get the audience laughing. The advertising industry milks this constantly, telling us a product is better simply because it's the most popular. So be skeptical. When you find yourself moving in lockstep with a large group, pause for a second and ask yourself if it actually makes sense. Just as we bow to the wisdom of crowds, we also have a powerful tendency to bow to individual authorities. This is the authority bias. The Bible teaches us what happens when we disobey authority. We get kicked out of paradise. And today's authorities, chief executives, scientists, doctors, stock market gurus, would have us believe the same thing. The problem? Their track records are often terrible. There are roughly 1 million trained economists on the planet, and not one of them accurately predicted the timing of the 2008 financial crisis. Psychologist Stanley Milgram demonstrated this bias dramatically in a famous 1961 experiment. Subjects were told to administer increasingly powerful electric shocks to a person on the other side of a glass panel. The person was an actor, and no real shocks were given, but the subjects didn't know that. As the actor screamed and writhed in fake pain, subjects wanted to stop. But the professor in the white lab coat would simply say, "Keep going, the experiment depends on it." The majority continued. More than half went all the way to what they believed was a lethal voltage, purely out of obedience to authority. Airlines have learned about the dangers of this bias. In the old days, the captain was king. If a co-pilot suspected an error, he wouldn't dare speak up. Now airlines use crew resource management, coaching crews to openly discuss any concerns immediately. In other words, they deliberately deprogram the authority bias. So whenever you're about to make a decision, think about which authority figures might be influencing you, and when you meet one in person, do your best to challenge them. Our deference to authority is matched by our vulnerability to charm. The liking bias is startlingly simple. The more we like someone, the more likely we are to buy from them or help them. But what makes someone likable? Research shows we find people pleasant if they're physically attractive, similar to us, or they like us. That's why advertising is stuffed with attractive people. It's why salespeople often mirror your gestures and language to create a sense of connection. And it's why compliments work wonders, even when they're totally empty. Joe Girard, the world's most successful car salesman, said his secret weapon was sending every customer a card every single month with one simple message: "I like you." Aid agencies use this brilliantly, plastering their campaigns with images of smiling children. You'll never see a stone-faced, wounded guerrilla fighter on their billboards, even though he needs help just as much. We respond to the cute and the similar. So if you're a consumer, always judge a product independently of who's selling it. Banish the salesperson from your mind. Pretend you don't like them. It's the only way to make a clear-headed decision. The way we irrationally value people is matched by how we irrationally value things. Consider the endowment effect. We value things more the moment we own them. If we're selling something, we charge more than we ourselves would pay for it. Psychologist Dan Ariely demonstrated this by raffling tickets to a major basketball game to his students. He then asked the students who didn't win how much they'd pay for a ticket. They estimated around $170. But the students who won wouldn't sell their tickets for less than an average of $2,400. Simple ownership made them add zeros to the price. This is why our homes fill up with junk we no longer need. We become emotionally attached to our stuff and systematically overvalue it. This effect is powerful. It even affects near ownership. Auction houses thrive on this. When you bid on an item until the very end, you start feeling like it's already yours. Withdrawing feels like a loss, and suddenly you're willing to pay way more than you planned. The lesson here is profound. Don't cling to things. Consider your possessions as something the universe has temporarily loaned you. Keep in mind, it can all vanish in a heartbeat. This mental detachment will help you make more rational decisions about what to keep and what to let go. Now let's venture into the tricky world of numbers, probability, and risk, an area where our intuition consistently fails us. Imagine two games of chance. In the first, you can win $10 million. The odds are 1 in 100 million. In the second, you can win $10,000. The odds are 1 in 10,000. Which do you play? Our emotions pull us toward the first game. The idea of $10 million is so intoxicating we barely register the microscopic odds. But objectively, the second game is 10 times better. This is the neglect of probability. We respond to the size of the potential payoff, but not to its likelihood. Our brains think dramatically, not mathematically. This is why state lotteries are booming. The trend is toward bigger and bigger jackpots, Mega Millions, Powerball, because they know the bigger the prize, the less we care about impossibly small odds. This lack of intuitive understanding of probability leads to terrible decision-making. We invest in risky startups because the potential profit makes our eyes light up, but we forget to investigate the slim chances of success. After a plane crash hits the news, we cancel our flights, even though the minuscule probability hasn't changed at all. This leads to the zero-risk bias. We crave absolute certainty. A risk reduction from 1% to 0% feels infinitely better than a reduction from 5% to 2%, even though the second option is 3 times more effective at saving lives. We have no intuitive grasp of risk, so we distinguish poorly between different threats. Hand in hand with our misunderstanding of probability is our belief in some kind of cosmic balancing force. This is the gambler's fallacy. In the summer of 1913, at a casino in Monte Carlo, the roulette ball landed on black 20 times in a row. Crowds gathered, betting millions on red. It had to change, they thought, but the ball landed on black again and again. It wasn't until the 27th spin that it finally landed on red. By then, the players were bankrupt. They believed previous events somehow influenced the next one, but with independent events, there's no harmonizing force. A roulette ball has no memory. Same with a coin toss. If a coin lands on heads 3 times in a row, what's the next toss likely to be? Most people bet on tails, thinking things must even out, but the probability is still 50-50. So take a closer look at the world around you. Truly independent events mostly exist only in casinos and textbooks. In real life, in business, health, relationships, events are often interrelated. What happened before does influence what happens next, but for purely independent events, there's no balancing force. What goes around comes around simply doesn't exist. Our struggle with numbers also extends to the very concept of average. This is the problem with averages. Suppose you're on a bus with 49 other people. At the next stop, the heaviest person in America gets on. The average weight of passengers increases by maybe 4 or 5%. No big deal. Now suppose the bus stops again, and Bill Gates gets on. By how much has the average wealth of passengers increased? Way more than 5%. If the other 50 people each have assets around $54,000, adding Bill Gates with his $59 billion fortune shoots the average wealth up to over $1.15 billion. A single outlier completely warps the picture, rendering the word average meaningless. Nassim Taleb warns, don't cross a river if it is, on average, 4 feet deep. It might be inches deep for long stretches but have a 20-foot torrent in the middle. Dealing in averages is risky business because they often mask what's really going on underneath. In our complex world, we see this Bill Gates phenomenon in more and more areas. There's no average website. A few like Google and Facebook get the vast majority of traffic. There's no average book sale. A few bestsellers dominate while most sell very few copies. There's no average actor's salary. A handful of stars earn millions while thousands scrape by. In these cases, mathematicians talk about a, quote, power law. A few extremes dominate, and the concept of average becomes worthless. So when someone uses the word average, think twice. Try to understand what's really happening underneath. If a single extreme case has huge influence, you should toss out the term average entirely. Finally, let's look at the very act of making decisions, how we choose to act or not act, and the hidden forces that drain our ability to choose wisely. You're in a marketing meeting. An advertising campaign has been running for 4 months and hasn't met a single goal. You want to scrap it. But the advertising manager pushes back. But we've invested so much money already. If we stop now, it'll all have been for nothing. This is the sunk cost fallacy. It's why we continue with failing projects, stay in bad relationships, or sit through terrible movies, just because we paid for the ticket. We've invested time, money, energy, or love, and that investment becomes a reason to keep going, even when we're dealing with a lost cause. The more we invest, the greater the sunk costs, and the stronger the urge to continue. The Concorde supersonic jet is a classic example. British and French governments knew for ages the project would never work financially, but they kept pouring in enormous sums, if only to save face. Abandoning it would have been admitting defeat. Rational decision-making requires you to forget about costs already incurred. No matter how much you've already invested, only your assessment of future costs and benefits should count. But what if the decision isn't about quitting, but about acting in the first place? In a soccer penalty shootout, the ball takes less than 0.3 seconds to reach the goal. The goalkeeper has to decide where to dive before the ball is even kicked. About a third of penalty kicks go left, a third go right, and a third go to the middle. Goalkeepers know this. Yet they almost always dive left or right. They rarely stay in the middle. Why? Simple answer: appearance. It looks more impressive and feels less embarrassing to dive the wrong way than to freeze on the spot and watch the ball sail past. This is the action bias, the urge to look active, even when it accomplishes nothing. In our hunter-gatherer past, action beat reflection every time. Lightning-fast reactions were essential for survival. If you saw something that looked like a predator, you didn't stop to analyze, you ran. We're the descendants of these quick responders. But today's world is different. It often rewards careful reflection. Yet inaction still feels like a cardinal sin. We get no medal, no statue, for making the right call by waiting. But if you act decisively and things improve, even by pure chance, you're hailed as a hero. The flip side is the omission bias. This shows up when both action and inaction lead to negative outcomes. In those cases, we tend to prefer inaction because its consequences seem less terrible. Suppose you're head of a drug administration. You have to decide whether to approve a new drug for terminally ill patients. The drug kills 20% of patients immediately but saves the other 80%. What do? Most people would withhold approval. Approving a drug that kills every fifth person feels worse than failing to save the other 80%. It's absurd, but it's common. Deliberate inaction somehow seems less grave than a comparable action. As the student movements of the 60s put it, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. All this deciding, acting, not acting, choosing this, rejecting that, is exhausting. This brings us to decision fatigue. Willpower is like a battery. After a while it runs out and needs recharging. The more decisions you make, the more depleted your willpower becomes. Psychologist Roy Baumeister demonstrated this by dividing students into two groups. The deciders had to make a long series of choices between small items. The non-deciders simply gave their opinions on items. Afterward, both groups had to keep their hands in ice-cold water as long as possible, a classic willpower test. The result? The deciders pulled their hands out much sooner. Intensive decision-making had drained their willpower. This is why, after a long day of comparing and choosing, you're more vulnerable to impulse buys at the grocery store. It's why IKEA puts its restaurants in the middle of the store, so you can recharge your blood sugar before tackling the candlestick section. And it affects even the most critical decisions. A study of Israeli judges showed they were far more likely to grant prisoners early release in the morning, after breakfast, or right after lunch. As the day wore on and decision fatigue set in, the percentage of favorable rulings dropped from 65% to almost zero. They took the easy default option, and prisoners stayed in jail. So if you've got an important presentation for your boss, when should you schedule it? First thing in the morning, when their mind is fresh, their blood sugar is high, and their willpower battery is fully charged. This journey through our mental blind spots might feel overwhelming. It seems like our brains are just a minefield of errors. But Dobelli's final message is one of profound, simple wisdom. He tells the story of the Pope asking Michelangelo the secret of his genius. How did you create the statue of David, the masterpiece of all masterpieces? Michelangelo's answer? It's simple. I removed everything that is not David. This is the guiding philosophy of the art of thinking clearly. We don't know for sure what makes us successful. We can't pinpoint exactly what makes us happy. But we know with absolute certainty what destroys success and happiness. This realization is fundamental. Negative knowledge, knowing what not to do, is far more powerful than positive knowledge. The path to clearer thinking isn't about adding more knowledge models or techniques. It's a path of subtraction. It's the via negativa, the negative path. Eliminate the thinking errors, and better thinking will follow naturally. Focus on what is not David, chisel it away, and the masterpiece will reveal itself. After exploring the 99 thinking errors and the art of thinking clearly, it's easy to feel a bit discouraged. It's like our brains are fundamentally broken, hardwired for irrationality, and clear thinking is some impossible dream. But that's not the real takeaway. The actual message is one of empowerment. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about gaining a crucial edge simply by being aware of the traps that snare everyone else. The most powerful idea in the entire book is what Dobelli saves for the end. Via negativa, the negative path. This is the simple but profound idea that we achieve wisdom and success not by learning what to do, but by learning what to avoid. We know with far more certainty what makes for a miserable life: debt, addiction, chronic stress, toxic relationships, than what makes for a happy one. We know what sinks a business: ignoring customers, piling up debt, failing to innovate, better than we know the exact formula for success. Michelangelo's genius wasn't knowing exactly how to create David from nothing. It was knowing what parts of the marble weren't David and needed to be chipped away. That's the essence of thinking clearly. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most disciplined at avoiding stupidity. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger built their investment empire on exactly this principle. As Buffett says, "Charlie and I haven't learned how to solve difficult business problems. What we've learned is to avoid them." This is liberating. You don't need all the answers. You just need to be relentlessly good at spotting and avoiding common pitfalls. So how do we apply this practically? You can't walk around with a mental checklist of 99 biases for every decision. As Dobelli admits, that would be exhausting and impractical. Instead, he suggests a simple two-tier approach. First, for decisions where consequences are small, don't overthink it. Let your intuition take over. Choosing between sparkling or still water, or what to watch tonight, doesn't need deep analysis. Thinking is tiring, and your mental energy is finite. Don't waste it on trivial stuff. Second, for situations where consequences are large, major career moves, significant investments, important relationship decisions, that's when you slow down. That's when you pull out your mental checklist. You don't need to remember all 99 biases, but you can build a habit of asking a few key questions. 1. Am I falling for a story? Am I being seduced by a compelling narrative instead of looking at hard facts? Am I only seeing the winners and ignoring thousands who failed? 2. What's the opposite of my belief? Actively seek out evidence that contradicts your view. Try to prove yourself wrong. If you can't, your belief is much stronger. 3. What are the other options? We often frame decisions as choosing between A and B, but there's almost always a C, D, and E. Force yourself to consider alternatives. 4. Why am I really doing this? Am I acting just to feel like I'm doing something, or am I continuing down a path simply because I've already invested so much? By building these simple questions into your process for big decisions, you systematically reduce the risks in your life. You start operating with a clarity most people never achieve. You're no longer just a passenger swept along by emotion and hidden bias. You're the pilot, with a checklist, prepared for turbulence. The art of thinking clearly isn't about becoming a flawless logic machine. It's about humility. It's about recognizing that the human mind, for all its brilliance, is a flawed instrument. But by understanding its flaws, by knowing where the blind spots are, we can compensate. We can learn to question our most cherished beliefs and find strength in knowing what we don't know. In the end, the journey to clearer thinking is the journey of chipping away everything that is not David. It's a lifelong process of reduction, simplification, and avoiding the foolishness that comes so naturally to us. And in that process, we don't just become better thinkers. We become wiser, more effective, and ultimately freer. That was our journey through The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. We've touched on the core ideas today, but I'll be honest. A summary can only take you so far. The true power of this book is in the cumulative effect of seeing these 99 biases, one after another, illustrated with memorable stories. It's like getting a software update for your brain. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today resonated with you, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can change how you see yourself and the world. You can find a link in the description below. Also, if you found this valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe. It lets us know we're on the right track, and makes sure you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together.